See, I see one mic back here, and then maybe the other mic can go to the other end over here. I should have my ball cap on.
My name is Jeannie. I'm a reporter from Lawrence. My question is that so anytime your stories come up, there are people out there who suggest that you were fed documents by the Chinese military generals or Forsythe or other critics or haters of Xi Jinping and Wen Jiabao. And I wonder, what do both of you think of this allegation? And what made you to pursue stories dealing with assets in China? Thank you.
I wish. If I were that plugged in, and these generals and Jiang Zemin and there were the Forsythe, a renegade general, and Jiang Zemin, they were the three sources that they apparently gave us, just handed us the documents. It wasn't like that at all. We started with open source. We made, and I say we, there were 10, 11 of us working on the story, and we all shared information. It was really exciting. And so we started making a family tree, and on May 10th, went and actually found these names. It was all kind of gibberish, but it was the sister and the brother-in-law of Xi Jinping. We're like, well, what's going on with that? And then Edie found a PDF document. It was an online document that was a share prospectus for a company in Chongqing, and it listed the asset structures for some holdings of Xi Jinping's sister and brother-in-law in this unlisted Beijing company in great detail, as David said. These things are in great detail, and then that led us down a path. And it's open source to the SAIC filings, which are barely open, but they're open, and that led us to the story. So it was not Jiang Zemin, renegade general, Forsythe's, no.
Yeah, I'd second that, of course. I know this question has come up a lot about my stories, and I tell you, there's not many journalists who are getting documents fed by high-ranking officials. I've never met anyone in the government who's given me any documents about anyone, especially someone as high-ranking as Wen Jiabao. And the people that I talked to many years ago when I first came to China, usually it was just people in business who said to me, there's a rumor. This rumor's been around for years about the Wen family, about Ping An, about the diamond industry, about private equity. And I kind of found this accidentally. I started looking up, I simply went to the Hong Kong website of Hong Kong Stock Exchange and looked up Ping An's prospectus. And from those records, this is in October, November 2011, I looked at who were the biggest shareholders. And I started noticing that some of these major Chinese shareholders were also investing in diamonds and related companies related to the Prime Minister's son. And I said, could this be an accident? That the rumor is that Wen family has shares in Ping An, and these companies, shell companies, also are in diamonds and private equity, all linked together. And so that took me down a new path, and it took a year, of course, to figure out who those people were. But it was totally an accident that I found these, and to me it's pretty amazing that no one had looked up this rumor, or at least no one had followed it through. It's read on the Hong Kong website, so I didn't have a single source for my documents on Wen Jiabao's family. Not one source. It was all documents, government documents.
So let's cut the crap on those rumors, okay? Enough. Let's see, where's our next question from? I see a hand back here. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm wondering what your personal feedback has been on the stories you have written, particularly out of your base where both of your companies operate from the United States. And based upon that feedback, I'm wondering if you can be so arrogant as to predict a little bit about what you think the impact of your stories will have going forward.
Do you mean the feedback like from our bosses in New York?
No, feedback from readers.
We've had a lot of feedback and a lot of, especially from Chinese journalists who wish they could do this themselves. You know, and I think they would be running circles around this given free reign. And it does get out in China. I mean, I think millions of people have read it. You know, in this age, it's hard to completely censor it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what the impact of these stories is going to be eventually, though. I just don't know.
Yeah, I can only predict that, you know, when my first piece came out, I did get several emails from the relatives of Benjamin, shocked at what they were seeing on the website before they shut the website down in China. And I think the impact of these stories is going to be that now it's known that these documents can be found. So it may not mean that corruption is going to end in China or that these families are going to all sell their stakes. But I think it put, and this was of course not my intention, because I didn't do this as an activist, but as a journalist. But I think the impact is, if you're going to do deals the way they've done the deals for the last 10 years, and accumulate hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in assets in partnerships and through shell companies, you're going to have to do that a lot more carefully in the next 10 years, because you could wake up, if you're an official or the relative of one of the senior officials, and see your portrait in the paper with lots of charts showing how you acquired assets, or hid assets in companies on local China. And so I think, unfortunately, maybe some of those records will be closed, but right now, there's an awful lot of records out there, and if journalists were going through the other high-ranking officials, they'd probably find a lot. And I think that fear is going to ripple through, if it hasn't already, ripple through the senior leaders in China and their relatives. And I think we've already seen in the last couple of months that some of them are moving away from some of the companies they were running and trying to distance themselves from partnerships. So I think it's going to be more difficult to hide your methods.
Other questions? Really? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Insofar as you can tell, what has been the reaction of ordinary Chinese people and those who have been able to read the story? Has it been, we knew this? Has it been, you know, this is amazing, thank you for exposing this? Has it been, what the hell are you Western journalists going after our great noble leaders who have delivered this fantastic, you know, economic miracle to China? I mean, I suspect it's a bit of all three, but I'd be interested in finding out what the reaction has been.
It is a bit of all three. There's been a lot of anger. I think a lot of Chinese people who are fortunate enough to read these are very angry about it. And you've seen, obviously, we've been writing about the Times, everybody's been writing about this nascent movement in China for asset disclosure. People having these protests around the country demanding that their leaders disclose their assets. So there has been that. There is always a little bit of that, oh yeah, we all know they had it. But I think most people, you know, to see it in black and white like that really does make a difference. And I think there was a lot of anger expressed by people.
Yeah, I have the same reaction, although occasionally someone will come up to me and say, despite all that, I still really like Manchula. And he probably didn't know it, or he was helping his parents. So I think you have reaction all over the place, but I'm really stunned. I thought after this series it would be very hard for me to hire a new translator, that people would be scared away at the scrutiny of the paper, but actually a lot of, many more, 3 or 4 times more people have applied for that translator job. And I think in journalism schools and young people, the reaction has been pretty positive about these stories, that we really open something up.
Maybe one more question. Anybody? Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. So both of you have obviously, I mean, the stories that you were working on took a huge amount of time. So I'm just, if you can tell me the size of the teams that you had working with you, and how much kind of research and that was put into these stories by people who couldn't actually be named in them.
Yeah, well, I just named two that shouldn't be named, but in an earlier answer, you know, and it's I think there were about 10 or 11 of us. I think since then our team's grown to about 13 this year, and we all love digging documents, and we all get really excited, and I'm speaking in the present tense. We all get really excited when we find things and share things with each other, and it's just really electric, and it was so exciting, and so you know, when we find something, you know, like in an SEIC document or something, then like 3 or 4 of us pounce on it, and we just start, you know, basically doing a small version of the, you know, human flesh machine, going down and just drilling down and trying to find all the angles and all the threads, and it can get pretty complicated. The amount of fact checking we did was just obscene. But we, you know, the idea was you can't make a single mistake. And we, you know, our stories were, you know, one was 5,000 words, and when the stories that came out in December about the princelings that we did, the 8 Immortals, I think combined we had like 6,000 or 7,000 words. Just an incredible amount of fact checking that we all spent, you know, up till 2, 3 in the morning for weeks at a time, even later than that, all across the world. And there were people in Hong Kong and Beijing and Shanghai and New York around Christmas time. I think there were 3 of the people were in England, and so it was unlike anything I ever seen. And I was just, the nice thing about it, and I know I was talking, you know, it's just so amazing just to work with like a team of people who are all like-minded, all love digging into documents, and I hope we can keep it up, you know, in years to come. You know, keep the team together. Sorry to crash on.
I had a group of 3 or 4 translators over the course of a year, and it was tricky because I didn't want them to know everything I was doing, and you know, several of them are Chinese citizens, so we thought about that very early on, about not putting them at risk. So I did have 3 or 4, some inside of China and some outside of China, and they were basically requesting the documents for me from the government. We were paying for those, and then I would have them translate those documents with the shareholders, the capital, you know, where their addresses were, and then it was basically building charts and trying to figure out who the people were. And there were hundreds of companies and several hundred people, and I think that's why it took so long. I wrote the first draft of the story in December of 2011, and it wasn't published till October 2012. So most of that time was trying to figure out who are most of the people, and fact checking it, and then I got more and more companies as I went along. And so I kept pushing back the date and telling the New York Times editors that we've got to make sure every little detail is checked, because this will be the most scrutinized story, certainly I ever write. And if the Chinese government is really monitoring everything we're doing, they're going to know where we got the documents, who we're talking to, who's translating, all that stuff. So it was a pretty delicate process. But as he said, Michael said, a pretty exciting process to try to, this detective story of looking at thousands of documents and trying to figure out how these trace back to the Prime Minister.
Well, obviously a team effort on both sides. A Pulitzer Prize winning effort on David and the Times' part. So as we end this discussion tonight, as we give applause to our guests and see them off the stage, I would like to ask everybody, Times, IHT, and Bloomberg, who worked on this project to stand up and share in the applause, because you certainly shared in the work that produced these fine pieces of journalism. Thank y'all.